What if I told you that a bear, yes, a literal bear, once came within seconds of starting World War III? Or that the Berlin Wall, the symbol of Cold War division, collapsed not by war or diplomacy, but because one man misspoke at a press conference? History is full of epic battles, brilliant leaders, and carefully crafted treaties, but hidden between those headlines are moments where everything changed, not because of genius, but because of simple human error. A wrong turn, a miscalculation, a delayed reaction, a single word spoken too soon. In this video, we're diving into 18 real mistakes, some tragic, some absurd, that altered the course of history. Some led to the deaths of millions, others brought down empires, and most of them, they were never supposed to happen. This isn't just a history lesson. This is a reminder of how fragile the world can be when one person makes the wrong choice. Let's begin. The first mistake, the severed head that started a massacre. In the early 1200s, Genghis Khan ruled the Mongol Empire with unmatched power. He had just begun forging a fragile peace with a rising power to the west, the Khwarezmian Empire in present-day Iran and Central Asia. Trade had opened between the two. Envoys had been exchanged. Everything was calm until a single governor made a fatal choice. A Mongol caravan entered Khwarezmian territory, carrying valuable goods and peaceful intentions. But the local governor, drunk on power or paranoia, attacked it. He killed the merchants and stole the cargo. Genghis Khan didn't react with rage, not yet. Instead, he sent 3 ambassadors to the Khwarezmian Shah with a request: punish the governor, restore justice, preserve peace. The Shah's reply? He had 1 envoy executed and sent the severed head back with the others. In Mongol tradition, killing a messenger was not just disrespectful, it was a declaration of war. And Genghis Khan didn't take declarations lightly. What followed was one of the most brutal military campaigns in human history. The Mongol army swept west with vengeance. Entire cities were leveled. Populations were wiped out. Even conservative estimates suggest over 1 million people died in the invasion. And the irony? At the time, the Mongols were still deeply engaged in their war in China. Had the Shah simply punished his rogue governor, history might have gone a very different way. The second mistake, the enigma that wasn't destroyed, May 9th, 1941. North Atlantic. A German U-boat, U-110, was spotted by Allied ships. It had already sunk multiple British vessels on this patrol, but this time, its luck ran out. Depth charges from a British destroyer crippled the submarine, forcing it to surface. The crew scrambled to evacuate. Smoke poured from the hull. Everyone assumed it was going down. The British were prepared for a fight. But when they approached the vessel, something unexpected happened. The Germans surrendered. Among the fleeing crew was Captain Fritz Julius Lemp, who realized something horrifying. The Enigma machine was still on board. Enigma was the Nazis' crown jewel, an advanced cipher device that encrypted every military message across the German Navy. Losing it could give the Allies the key to decode entire operations. Lemp tried to swim back. His mission? Destroy the machine. But he never made it. He either drowned or was shot. No one knows for sure. Meanwhile, British sailors boarded the ghost ship. Inside, untouched, sat the Enigma machine, and just as crucial, a set of codebooks that revealed alternate ciphers the Germans used for backup communication. That mistake, not destroying the machine, gave the codebreakers at Bletchley Park an unprecedented advantage. For the first time, they could consistently read German naval messages. Convoys could be rerouted, U-boats ambushed, lives saved. And to keep it secret, the British let U-110 quietly sink later, pretending it had taken the Enigma with it. The Germans never knew. And the tides of war began to turn. The third mistake, Gunther's slip that brought down a wall. For nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall divided a city, a country, and a world. Families were split. East was locked away from West. Behind the concrete and barbed wire stood not just guards, but an entire ideology. No one expected it to fall overnight. But then came Gunther Schabowski. November 9th, 1989. Schabowski was a low-profile East German official who had just been promoted and tasked with announcing minor changes to travel rules. His press conference was supposed to be routine, but when a reporter asked, when will these new regulations take effect? Schabowski fumbled through his papers, couldn't find the exact date, and casually said, as far as I know, immediately. That one word, immediately, lit a fuse. News spread like wildfire. Crowds rushed to border crossings. Thousands of East Berliners gathered at the wall, chanting to be let through. The guards were stunned. No orders had been given. Some thought it was a trap. Others had seen the same press conference and assumed the law had changed. At 11:30 p.m., with pressure building and no command from above, the guards at Bornholmer Street crossing made a snap decision. They opened the gates. Within hours, the Berlin Wall, a symbol of division for 28 years, was breached by hugs, tears, and hammer blows. People danced on top of it. Families reunited. The Cold War cracked, And all of it because one bureaucrat didn't double-check his notes. The fourth mistake, the nuclear bear, October 25th, 1962. The world stood on a knife's edge. The Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the United States and the Soviet Union terrifyingly close to nuclear war. Both sides were on full alert. Every movement was a potential trigger. Just after midnight at a US Air Force base in Duluth, Minnesota, a guard spotted something moving near the perimeter fence. In the darkness, the shape climbed over the wire. The guard fired. He was convinced this was a Soviet saboteur, sent to disable American nuclear capabilities before a first strike. His gunshots activated a base-wide sabotage alarm, which was standard protocol. But here's the problem. At a nearby airfield in Wisconsin, a wiring error caused the wrong system to activate. Instead of a security alert, the base's nuclear-armed interceptor jets received a launch signal. These jets were on DEFCON 3, just one step below all-out nuclear war, and the pilots had been explicitly told, if you're called to launch, it's real. No drills, no second guesses. Within minutes, the jets were taxiing to the runway, ready to take off. If they had launched, the Soviets would have interpreted it as an attack. Retaliation would be automatic. The world could have ended before sunrise. But one officer noticed something was off. He jumped into a vehicle, raced across the airstrip, and signaled the jets just in time, before they left the ground. The mysterious intruder that started it all? A bear. Just a bear. One animal, one misunderstanding. And the entire world survived by seconds. The fifth mistake. Mao's war on sparrows. In 1958, Chairman Mao Zedong launched a sweeping campaign to transform China. It was called the Great Leap Forward, and its goal was nothing short of turning a poor rural nation into a modern industrial power. Part of that plan involved eliminating what Mao called the four pests: flies, mosquitoes, rats, and sparrows. Why sparrows? Because they ate grain, and grain meant food. Mao believed that sparrows were stealing vital resources from the people, and so the nation declared war on birds. What followed was surreal. Millions of people, including children, took to the streets with pots, pans, gongs, and sticks. They climbed trees to destroy nests, smashed eggs, and banged on metal for hours to keep birds flying. Too afraid to land, the sparrows would collapse midair from exhaustion. Within months, the Eurasian tree sparrow, a natural part of the ecosystem, was nearly wiped out across China. But no one had considered what came next. With the sparrows gone, insects and locusts, which the birds had previously kept in check, exploded in number. Swarms devoured crops, fields were left barren, food production collapsed. Combined with poor planning, false reporting, and other disastrous policies, this triggered the Great Chinese Famine, one of the deadliest in human history. Tens of millions of people died. In 1960, too late, the Chinese government quietly ended the anti-sparrow campaign and redirected efforts toward a new pest, bedbugs, but the damage had already been done, all because someone tried to outsmart nature with pots and pans. The sixth mistake, Migley's deadly inventions. In the 1920s, Thomas Migley Jr. was hailed as a genius, a problem solver, an innovator, a man whose work would power the future. His first breakthrough came in 1921 while working for General Motors. Car engines at the time suffered from knocking, a disruptive, damaging sound. Migley discovered that adding a chemical called tetraethyl lead to gasoline solved the problem instantly. The fuel burned cleaner, engines ran smoother. It was a triumph, except workers at lead production plants began hallucinating, collapsing, and in some cases, dying. Migley himself took a leave of absence due to lead poisoning. Still, the fuel, branded ethyl to avoid saying the word lead, was marketed aggressively. Soon, leaded gasoline was everywhere. But Migley wasn't done. In the 1930s, he introduced another world-changing invention, Freon, the first chlorofluorocarbon, or CFC. It was used as a refrigerant in air conditioners, refrigerators, and later in aerosol sprays. It was non-toxic, non-flammable, and incredibly convenient. Decades later, scientists discovered the horrifying truth. CFCs were destroying the ozone layer, the Earth's shield against ultraviolet radiation, and lead pollution from gasoline was linked to brain damage, environmental degradation, and mass public health crises. Migley didn't live to see the full extent of the destruction. In 1944, he contracted polio and became paralyzed. Using his engineering skills, he designed a system of pulleys and ropes to lift himself in and out of bed. One morning, he was found strangled by his own invention. Whether it was a tragic accident or something darker, no one knows for sure. A historian once said, Migley had more impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in Earth's history. He meant it, literally. The seventh mistake, Arminius and the Roman ambush. In the year 9 AD, the Roman Empire was expanding confidently into the untamed lands of Germania. Commanding this push was Publius Quinctilius Varus, a trusted Roman general. His job? Establish order, collect taxes, and civilize the tribes. Among his officers was a young German-born noble named Arminius. He had been raised in Rome, trained in Roman military strategy, and even earned citizenship. To Varus, Arminius was a loyal ally, a bridge between cultures. But Arminius had a secret. Beneath the armor and salute beats the heart of a rebel. He watched as Rome imposed its rule on his homeland, and he began plotting. That autumn, as 3 Roman legions, around 15,000 to 20,000 men, began marching back to their winter quarters, Arminius approached Varus with news. A rebellion had broken out nearby. He urged the general to act quickly. Varus believed him. The legions turned off the main road and entered the Teutoburg forest, a dark, tangled stretch of wilderness. The path was narrow. The army stretched thin. Rain poured down, slowing their advance. They were vulnerable. Then, the ambush. Germanic warriors, hidden in the trees, struck with terrifying precision. For 3 days, the Romans were slaughtered. They couldn't form ranks. They couldn't retreat. They couldn't win. Varus, realizing the horror of what had happened, fell on his own sword. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. The Roman Empire, so sure of its strength, never again attempted to conquer Germania, east of the Rhine. And the legions destroyed in that forest? Their numbers were never reused out of shame. Rome had trained Arminius, and Arminius had used that training to break them. The 8th mistake, the rejected engineer who brought down an empire. In the early 1450s, the once mighty Byzantine Empire was a fading shadow of its former self. Constantinople, its capital, still stood proud, but it was surrounded, weakened, and outnumbered. One day, a Hungarian engineer named Orban arrived at the city gates. He carried with him blueprints, ideas, and a proposal. "I can build you a cannon," he said, "one so powerful it can shatter walls once thought impenetrable." But the Byzantines had a problem. They were broke, low on resources, and frankly, skeptical. They turned him away. So Orban took his talents elsewhere, to a young, ambitious sultan named Mehmed II, ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Mehmed saw what the Byzantines didn't: opportunity. He gave Orban everything he needed: funds, metal, workers. Within months, the engineer produced a behemoth, a 27-foot-long cannon called the Basilica. It fired 600-pound stone balls with enough force to level ancient defenses. In April 1453, Mehmed began the siege of Constantinople. Orban's cannon thundered day and night. The walls trembled, the cracks deepened. After 53 days, the Ottomans breached the city. Constantinople, the jewel of Eastern Christendom, fell. The Byzantine Empire, which had lasted over 1,000 years, was no more, all because they didn't believe in a man with wild ideas and a very, very big cannon. The 9th mistake, Columbus and the wrong math that changed the world. In the late 1400s, many scholars already had a pretty good idea of the Earth's size. The ancient Greek mathematician Eratosthenes had calculated it centuries earlier, and he was surprisingly accurate. But Christopher Columbus? He had other ideas. He believed the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. He also thought Asia extended far more to the east than it really did. So when he proposed a plan to sail west from Europe to reach the riches of Asia, many experts told him flat out, "You'll starve to death in open water." But Columbus was confident, and maybe more importantly, he was convincing. The Spanish crown, Queen Isabella, and King Ferdinand eventually funded the voyage. On August 3rd, 1492, Columbus set sail with 3 ships, expecting to reach Japan in just a few weeks. He was, of course, wildly wrong. Instead of Asia, he ran into something else entirely. An entire continent that Europeans hadn't known existed. The Americas. He didn't know it at the time. In fact, Columbus died believing he had reached the outskirts of Asia. But that miscalculation, his flawed math, and misplaced confidence triggered centuries of colonization, conquest, migration, and war. It reshaped the global economy. It changed cultures, borders, and entire civilizations. Had Columbus used correct math, the trip would have seemed far too long and dangerous. He probably never would have set sail. In the end, it wasn't accuracy that changed history. It was a mistake. A very lucky and very costly mistake. The 10th mistake, Alexander's death without a plan. In 323 BC, at the age of just 32, Alexander the Great lay dying in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. He had conquered more of the known world than anyone before him. From Greece to Egypt, Persia to India, his empire was vast, his army unstoppable. His name feared everywhere. But on his deathbed, as fever consumed him, someone asked, "To whom do you leave the empire?" Alexander's answer? "To the strongest." No plan. No heir ready to rule. His only legitimate son hadn't even been born yet. His half-brother, Aridaeus, had severe mental disabilities. The result? Chaos. What followed was a brutal, decades-long power struggle known as the Wars of the Diadochi, the successors. Alexander's top generals, once loyal allies, turned on each other. They carved the empire into pieces, formed and broke alliances, assassinated rivals. Alexander's wife, son, and even mother were eventually murdered in the chaos. By 281 BC, less than half a century after his death, Alexander's dream of a united empire was gone. In its place stood several rival kingdoms, the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, the Antigonids, each clinging to a different piece of his legacy. And so the man who conquered the world with unmatched vision left it with no vision at all for what came next. The 11th mistake, Hitler's tank split that let D-Day succeed. In the months leading up to June 1944, the German High Command knew one thing for certain: the Allies would invade. What they didn't know was where. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt believed the invasion would come at Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point from Britain, with ideal access to German territory. General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, agreed that Calais was a strong possibility, but warned they could land anywhere, including Normandy. But the one voice that mattered most, Adolf Hitler, couldn't decide. Instead of listening to either of his commanders, he split the tank divisions awkwardly. Some were placed inland, too far to respond quickly. Others were kept near the coast, but not enough to mount a proper defense. Then came Operation Fortitude, a brilliant Allied deception campaign. Fake radio traffic, dummy tanks, even a decoy army led by General Patton, all designed to convince Hitler that the real invasion would be at Calais. It worked. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, many German commanders, including Rommel, were caught off guard. Rommel was visiting his wife for her birthday. Other key officers were off duty due to bad weather forecasts. Rundstedt requested permission to release reinforcements, but Hitler refused. By the time the order came, it was too late. Allied air power had crippled German movements. Chaos was spreading. Over 150,000 troops landed on D-Day. 5 beachheads were secured. The invasion was a success. Hitler had built fortresses, laid mines, and positioned artillery. But in the end, it was his own indecision and mistrust of his generals that gave the Allies their opening. The 12th mistake, Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's fatal gamble against the Soviets, June 22, 1941. At dawn, over 3 million German soldiers surged across the eastern border. Tanks, planes, and infantry moved in perfect coordination. Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, had begun. Hitler believed it would be a quick victory. He thought the Red Army was weak. He expected the Soviet government to collapse within weeks. And at first, it seemed he was right. German forces advanced rapidly. They encircled entire Soviet armies, captured hundreds of thousands of troops, and approached key cities like Leningrad, Kiev, and Moscow. The Soviet Union looked like it was on the brink of total collapse. But then, the tide turned. Soviet resistance hardened, supply lines grew too long. German troops weren't prepared for the brutal Russian winter. Tanks froze, guns jammed, soldiers died in droves, not from bullets, but from the cold. At Leningrad, the Germans laid siege to the city, but never captured it. Over 1 million civilians died, mostly from starvation. At Moscow, German troops got close enough to see the Kremlin spires, but were pushed back by a surprise Soviet counterattack, led by Siberian troops equipped for the cold. By the end of 1941, Germany had lost over 100,000 soldiers. And Hitler, furious at his generals, took direct control of the war effort. That only made things worse. What began as a swift offensive became a long, grinding war, the deadliest front in human history. Operation Barbarossa not only failed to conquer the Soviet Union, it helped create the Eastern Bloc, reshape post-war Europe, and set the stage for the Cold War. Hitler gambled everything on one blow, and that single miscalculation, invading Russia too soon with too much hubris, may have sealed his defeat. The 13th mistake, Kim Jong-nam's Disneyland mistake. For a time, it seemed Kim Jong-nam would be the next leader of North Korea. He was the eldest son of Kim Jong-il, held senior positions in the government, and was seen as the natural successor. He had power, he had status, he had the name. But in 2001, everything changed because of Disneyland. Jong-nam was caught in Tokyo's Narita airport, trying to enter Japan using a fake Dominican passport. His goal? Not espionage, not diplomacy. He just wanted to take his son to Tokyo Disneyland. For a country like North Korea, one of the most secretive and paranoid regimes on earth, this was unforgivable. The embarrassment was so great that Kim Jong-il cancelled a state visit to China. Jong-nam was quietly removed from power and sent into unofficial exile. Over the years, he lived a relatively open life abroad, in China, Macau, Malaysia, frequenting casinos, giving interviews, and criticizing North Korea's succession plans. He even reportedly shared information with foreign intelligence, including the CIA. Meanwhile, back in Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un, his younger half-brother, was rising. And Jong-nam, once the crown prince, became a potential threat. In 2017, at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, 2 women approached him. One smeared something on his face. Seconds later, he collapsed. It was VX nerve agent, a weapon of mass destruction. He died within minutes. The women were arrested but claimed they thought it was part of a prank show. International investigators concluded what most already suspected. The order came from Pyongyang. Kim Jong-nam's fate wasn't sealed in a war room, but in an airport line with a fake passport and a dream of visiting Disneyland. The 14th mistake, Rome trains its own destroyer. History is filled with betrayals, but few are as poetic or as devastating as this one. Arminius, the Germanic noble who orchestrated one of Rome's most crushing defeats, wasn't born an enemy. He was actually raised by Rome. As a boy, he was taken from his tribe and brought to the empire, not as a prisoner, but as a hostage turned protege. Rome gave him a Latin education, taught him military strategy, and trained him as a Roman officer. He fought for them, wore their armor, spoke their language. Rome believed it was shaping him into a loyal servant. What they didn't see was that Arminius was learning their every move. Not to serve, but to strike. He returned to Germania, a decorated Roman officer, exactly the kind of man Rome trusted to manage its new territories. So, when he came to General Varus and reported a local rebellion, there was no reason to doubt him. The rest is bloody history. Varus leads 3 Roman legions into the Teutoburg forest. Arminius disappears, only to return at the head of a Germanic ambush. The Roman army is annihilated. Varus commits suicide. Rome loses 20,000 men in a single campaign. But here's the haunting twist. Rome taught Arminius how to win. Without their schools, their weapons, their military doctrine, he would never have been able to destroy them. They built the perfect soldier, and he brought them to their knees. The 15th mistake, Constantine's spy list mistake. In the 8th century, the Byzantine Empire was locked in a cold war of its own, with the rising Bulgarian state just to the north. It wasn't a war of swords and shields, it was a war of whispers, of spies. Emperor Constantine V had done what any clever ruler would do. He infiltrated the Bulgarian court with secret agents, passing him key intelligence from inside enemy walls. But in 774 AD, the Bulgarian ruler Telerig began to notice something strange. Every plan he made, Constantine already seemed to know it. Something, or someone, was leaking everything. So Telerig made a bold move. He wrote a letter to the Byzantine emperor, pretending to defect. He claimed he wanted to flee to Constantinople and join the empire. But he needed one thing first. "Send me the names of your agents in my court," he wrote, "so I can protect them as I escape." Constantine, thrilled at the chance to win over a rival king, took the bait. He sent the list. What happened next was swift and merciless. Telerik executed every Byzantine spy on the list. Overnight, Constantine's entire intelligence network in Bulgaria was wiped out. In one letter, years of espionage were destroyed. Not by swords, not by armies, but by a lie. And a little too much trust. Telerik didn't just outsmart an emperor. He did it with nothing more than a pen and a plan. The 16th mistake. Russia's Alaska sale. In 1867, the Russian Empire made a deal that seemed smart at the time. They were low on money. They'd just lost the Crimean War, and Alaska, a frozen, remote, sparsely populated territory, felt more like a liability than an asset. Russia also feared a future war with Britain, whose forces were stationed nearby in Canada. If that ever happened, they believed they couldn't defend Alaska. So they offered it to the one power that might block British expansion, the United States. The price? $7.2 million, just over 2 cents per acre. At the time, Americans mocked the purchase. Newspapers called it Seward's Folly, named after Secretary of State William H. Seward, who negotiated the deal. People joked the US had bought a polar bear wasteland. But fast forward, Alaska would go on to become a strategic military outpost, especially during the Cold War. It holds billions of barrels of oil, massive reserves of gold, copper, and other minerals, and gives the US direct access to both the Arctic and the Pacific. Russia, meanwhile, lost control of a territory twice the size of Texas, without firing a shot. In hindsight, the sale is often considered one of the worst land deals in history. Not because Russia was tricked, but because they underestimated what the land could become. Sometimes the biggest losses don't come from war. They come from selling too soon. The 17th mistake, the treaty that helped start World War II. In 1919, the world was reeling from the devastation of World War I. Millions were dead. Empires had collapsed. Entire continents had been scarred. And so, in a palace near Paris, the victors gathered to shape the peace. The result was the Treaty of Versailles, a document designed not just to end the war, but to punish the losing side, Germany. The treaty forced Germany to accept full responsibility for the war, surrender territory, including areas with millions of ethnic Germans, pay enormous reparations, sums they couldn't realistically afford, drastically limit the size of their military. It wasn't peace, it was humiliation. German citizens felt betrayed. They called it a diktat, a dictated peace. The British economist John Maynard Keynes warned that the treaty was too harsh. "You are sowing the seeds of another war," he wrote. Few listened. Over the next decade, Germany's economy collapsed. Hyperinflation took hold, nationalism surged, and into this chaos stepped a man who promised to restore pride and power, Adolf Hitler. The Treaty of Versailles didn't directly cause World War II, but it built the resentment, created the desperation, and fueled the fire that made it possible. Peace is only lasting when it is just. Versailles was not peace. It was pressure, waiting to explode. The 18th mistake, the fort that Germany walked around. After the devastation of World War I, France made a promise to itself. Never again would German boots march across French soil unchecked. So they built a wall. Not a literal one, but a massive network of fortifications known as the Maginot Line. Underground bunkers, reinforced gun emplacements, railways, artillery, fuel reserves. Stretching from Switzerland to Luxembourg, it was a technical marvel. Designed to slow any German invasion, it gave France time to mobilize. On paper, it was brilliant. But there was a problem. The Maginot Line stopped at the Ardennes forest, a dense, rugged region that French commanders believed was impassable for tanks. The Germans saw that gap, and in 1940 they went right through it. Using blitzkrieg tactics, German forces bypassed the Maginot Line completely. They surged through Belgium, cut off French forces from behind, and captured Paris in just 6 weeks. The Maginot Line, strong, immovable, and impressive, was left behind, unused. Its guns never fired a meaningful shot. It became a symbol, not of strength, but of false confidence, of preparing for the last war instead of the next one. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Sometimes the greatest mistake isn't what you forget to build. It's what you believe can't be broken. The world changed because someone slipped. History books often celebrate great victories and famous leaders, but hidden in the margins are these moments of hesitation, overconfidence, misjudgment, ego, miscommunication, one misplaced trust, one wrong turn, one word too soon, the collapse of a wall, the birth of a famine, the rise of a dictator, the death of an empire. These weren't carefully planned. They were mistakes, some small, some massive, all human. And yet, each one changed everything. It's easy to imagine history as something distant, carved in stone. But often it's as fragile as a signature, a sentence, or a silent assumption. Maybe that's why these stories matter. Because if the world can shift from a press conference, or a bear in the wrong place, or a cannon that could have been built for the other side, then maybe, just maybe, our choices today hold more weight than we think. If this story made you rethink how fragile history truly is, consider subscribing. I've got more real stories where small moments lead to massive consequences. And tell me in the comments, if you could go back and fix just one of these 18 mistakes, which one would it be? Let's talk. Until next time, stay curious and don't underestimate the power of being just a little bit wrong.